Hi, my name's Matt Yost. I'm an agroclimate extension specialist with Utah State University. And today I want to talk about some of the outdoor hemp field studies that we are conducting this year. This is some of the first outdoor hemp research in over 80 or 90 years in the state of Utah. And we're really excited to be doing this research to try and help producers answer some basic agronomic questions about how to produce hemp in the field. So today I'm going to talk about four separate studies that we're conducting with hemp and end with a drone tour of the plots. First, I want to show you the plots, the location. So the picture here is an aerial footage or aerial image of our site in Wellsville, Utah. So this is where the research is happening. Wellsville, if you're not familiar, is on the southwestern part of the Cache Valley in northern Utah. And if you notice in the center of that image, about halfway through, there's a horizontal strip there. It's got kind of a lighter color, the soil there, is where we have the acre, approximately an acre of hemp outdoor trials. The first trial that we're looking at was planting date. It's really one of the first questions, first decisions that a producer would make when growing hemp is when to plant. So the majority of the hemp that we planted in these trials happened on the 27th of May. But we also included some later planting dates. So we had a date on the 22nd of June and another one on the 7th of July. Nothing magical about these dates. We did not pick them to coincide with full moon. Some people might indicate would be important, but we selected these dates because they were dates when we had our irrigation turn, and so we transplanted just the day of when irrigation water was available. You'll notice there that really not a lot of difference in the height or size of the plants between the latter two planting dates in June and July, but really a stark difference between the May planting and the latter plantings. So really a strong indication that if you're interested in growing hemp, it's a good idea to get it out as quickly as possible. Probably not too early. It's another thing that we'll need to look at in the future is how early can you get it in to avoid a frost, but really a great idea to get it in towards the end of May if possible, because you'll likely suffer in growth and size of your plants and production if you use later planting dates. I just want to quickly show you how or point out that we transplanted these clones. So everything was done by hand. We transplanted clones using a 5x5 foot spacing. We did that because we got these in quite early, and with an army of about 8 students, we're able to transplant this acre, roughly 2,000 plants, in about 5 hours. So we transplanted all of these clones, and for this first study, I want to just show you a little bit how it was designed. So if you notice the blue and orange squares there, those are where we have different planting date treatments. And for each of our plots or each of our treatments, we used nine hemp plants. And the reason we did that was to try to make sure that we had enough neighboring plants to get a good representation of each treatment. So the blue and the orange there indicates the separate planting dates, the later planting dates, and then the majority of the rest of the study was planted in May, and so we'll have a comparison there between the three transplant dates. For this study, we only used the Trump or T1 variety of hemp. Okay, the second study is to look at fertilizer levels. And so for the majority of the hemp that we planted, if you look here on the top left, for the majority of the hemp, we used Utah State University guidelines for corn. We have very little fertility information for outdoor hemp at this point. And so we used the best thing that we could come up with, and that was recommendations for corn. And so the majority of the hemp received about 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre at planting. And the reason we use that is because this is the second year after alfalfa. And so we think that we still have some nitrogen credit from the alfalfa. And then we fertilized this hemp with phosphorus and potassium using soil tests and Utah State University recommendations. So there's some claims in the hemp industry that hemp needs just high amounts of phosphorus, especially phosphorus and maybe nitrogen. And so the other two treatments were to increase that. So we had 100 pounds of additional nitrogen per acre in this treatment here on the bottom. And on the right here, we had an additional 100 pounds of phosphorus as P2O5 above Utah State University guidelines. Now you'll notice that in this picture here, I just want to point out that this plant was not similar to some of the other plants in this treatment. And so we're really not seeing indications that additional fertilizer is going to hurt production or hurt the hemp plants. But we have noticed that there's a lot of variability out in the field. And that's what you're seeing here is really some variability. The plant right here behind it also received that additional 100 pounds of nitrogen. And so there's some other factors going on here. And with replication and measuring this in multiple places, we'll have a good indication of whether this additional fertilizer is beneficial, needed, or whether we can fertilize hemp very similar to how we might fertilize corn. You've seen something like this before, so I won't spend a lot of time, but just for the fertilizer study, we're only using the Trump variety. And we have these blocks here that receive the additional fertilizer, and we'll compare that to other treatments where we fertilized it just based on university recommendations for corn. Okay, the third study and the largest that occupies the majority of that acre that we have in this research is dedicated to looking at irrigation strategies. So for this study, we have 6 different irrigation technologies. Now, these are all sprinklers that are attached to a linear, which is very similar to a pivot, except that it travels in a straight line. So on this linear, we have 6 different irrigation sprinklers. Excuse me. 3 of those are low elevation sprinklers, so they're just a few feet off the ground. That includes this first one right here, the third one here, and these last 2. So actually 4 low elevation sprinklers. We're also comparing it to this second one right here, which is a mid elevation sprinkler. It's sitting about 5-6 feet off the ground. This is what most pivots or linears in Utah and most places in the West would have. And then one of the newest technologies is drip irrigation for pivots and linears. And so we're also testing that system. So in all of these irrigation technologies, we're also looking at 3 different hemp varieties. So we have Tokyo, Abacus, and Trump. And these are all sourced locally here in Utah. And then on top of that, we also have different irrigation rates. So we're looking at full irrigation and then reduced irrigation, where we put on 75% rates, 50% rates. And so the goal here is to see how do these different varieties do under pivot or linear irrigation in general? 2, how do each of the irrigation systems do? Do some of them produce better quality hemp, higher yielding hemp? And then also to see how each of these 3 varieties might handle stress, water stress. Also want to give you just a visual indication of here of how the hemp looks, how it's doing. So this picture was taken about 2 months after planting, on about the 25th of July. Tina Sullivan here is a graduate student that's helping to lead this project. And for reference, Tina is about 5'5". So you can see that we've got definitely some differences in height among the different varieties, and different growth patterns, different structures of the plant, but overall good growth. This irrigation study there's a lot going on, so don't get lost in this, but just quickly want to show you that on each span, so these irrigation systems are arranged on each span. So this would be from one tire track to the other tire track, and all of this span would be one irrigation system. So it could be the drip irrigation or the mid-elevation sprinklers. And so on each span, we have the same treatments. We have 3 varieties, Tokyo, Trump, and Abacus, and they're replicated 3 times. And then we're also looking at different irrigation rates for each of those varieties. Okay, now for the good part. I want to share a little bit of data. We're still in the process of collecting data, and will be as we look at yield and quality of the hemp. But one thing we have been able to look at so far is mortality rates. How many of these plants have we lost for a number of reasons, water stress or just other issues that happen during transplanting. And so first on the left here, I want to look at the different irrigation systems. So the first 2 here are the low elevation sprinklers. We have a LIPA and a LISA. We lost about 10% of the plants that we transplanted. And a very similar loss for the drip irrigation, but we did see a small increase, lost about 5% more plants in the mid elevation sprinklers. We're not sure why this is the case. It could be related to the irrigation system. It might also be related to how we transplanted these. So it took us about 5 hours to transplant. The first area that we transplanted was actually the mid elevation sprinklers. And so these would have went maybe a few hours extra without being watered right after transplanting than some of these other systems, and that might be why we lost more plants. It does point to the fact that as soon as possible after transplanting, it's a good idea to get irrigation watered on, get the soil, get those transplants wet. When we look at the 3 varieties that we have, Abacus, Tokyo, and Trump, saw a similar loss there. About 10% of the plants, except Tokyo may have had a little bit higher mortality rates than the other 2 varieties. Okay, the last study. In this study, we're looking at those 3 varieties that we've sourced from Utah, Tokyo, Trump, and Abacus, and also comparing them to another 8 varieties sourced from Colorado. And you can see what they are there. So all 11 varieties were planted in the last span of this study. And so they're all getting 100% irrigation. And the purpose of this one is just to see how these 11 varieties perform. How well do they transplant? How do they yield? What kind of quality hemp do they produce? And so that's what we have here in the 4th study. I want to share this last piece of data here. This is mortality rates for those 11 varieties. And you'll notice quickly here that there was a lot more variation. Some of those varieties, we lost very little or no plants. All 27 plants that we transplanted survived and are doing well. But we have some other varieties where we lost quite a few. We lost 10, 15, 20, up to 25% of the plants that we transplanted. And so really some vast differences, and also important to realize that when you're transplanting hemp, there's going to be some losses. Unless you can really take extreme care of each and every one of these plants, which becomes difficult to do on a large scale operation, that there's going to be some loss. A lot of this loss may have been due to the fact that this was irrigated with the linear, and so we can't irrigate fast and we can't irrigate everything all at the same time. And so it takes time between transplanting and when that first irrigation can make it across the ground in order to wet these transplants and help them establish. Okay, I want to end here with a quick video tour. So we're sitting on the west side of that acre piece that I showed you at the beginning. So this is where we have the fertility trials and the planting trials, and then we're going to move to the east, and I'll show you as we go along. So right here we're in the fertility trial. It's not very big. We just have a small block there. You can see the tire track. So just right here in the overhang area is where we have the fertility trials. So now we're now moving into the first span of that lateral. And this is where we have LIPA irrigation. So this is a low elevation system. And you'll see the different varieties here. They're planted in blocks of 9 plants for each variety. And we've kind of mixed them around so we get replication. And then we have different irrigation rates. So this section right here would have a full irrigation, whereas another section right here might have a reduced irrigation of 75% or 50%. And you'll notice as we go along that there's not a lot of consistent impact of irrigation treatments yet. We randomly kind of lose plants, different varieties in different places, but really not seeing a lot of trends yet. So this is the first span. This is the low elevation sprinklers. And I'll kind of pause here. So that's the first span, the low elevation sprinklers. We're now moving into the mobile drip irrigation in this second span. This is the mobile drip irrigation. Notice not a lot of variation. Plants look similar between the mobile drip irrigation and the LIPA, one of the low elevation. In some cases we looks like there's some more holes, gaps here. Okay, so that's the mobile drip irrigation. We're now moving into the mid elevation sprinklers. This is what is installed on most pivots in Utah. I apologize. This is not the mid elevation sprinklers. This is the second low elevation sprinkler system. This is LISA. The mid elevation sprinklers will be on the next span. So this is another low elevation system here. Okay. Now we're moving into the last span of the irrigation study. So this is where we have the mid elevation sprinklers in this span here. And if you remember, I mentioned that we did have a little bit higher mortality in this span compared to some of the other spans. So you'll see here we have these orange stakes. That's where we lost plants, and we came in shortly after we lost them, or as soon as we could have, we lost them, and had irrigation, and we replaced as many of these plants as we could. So this is the mid elevation sprinkler. Now we're moving into the last span of the linear. And the last span is where we have the 11 varieties, all irrigated at 100% irrigation. And as we go along here, you'll kind of notice that there's a lot of differences in size of the plants, height, color. In some cases, we had some abnormalities. But here we've got the 11 varieties, and they're planted in blocks of 9. So a block of 9 plants here, another block here of all of the different varieties. Also notice here that we have alfalfa and we have corn. And so the same treatments, the same irrigation treatments are being applied to these crops. And so we'll be able to compare the performance of hemp under these different irrigation strategies to other crops that we commonly grow. And that's it.